February 21st, 2026. A woman arrives at Cabañas La Loma, a vacation compound nestled in the mountains of Tapalpa, Jalisco, Mexico. The compound sits approximately 130 kilometers from Guadalajara, surrounded by dense forest and steep mountain terrain. It is remote, it is defensible. It is exactly the kind of location someone running from the most intensive manhunt in Mexican history would choose to hide. She is visiting someone the world has been hunting for over a decade, someone with a $15 million bounty from the United States government on his head, someone who has survived by trusting almost no one, moving constantly between safe houses and mountain hideouts, never being photographed in recent years, always rumored to be dead, but never found. Every intelligence agency on Earth had failed to pin him down. The DEA had been tracking him since 2010. The FBI had dedicated entire units to finding him. Mexican military intelligence had made capturing him a top priority, and yet year after year, he remained free. She stays at the compound for several hours, then she leaves. He stays behind with his security detail, men heavily armed who have sworn to protect him. 24 hours later, Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, known to the world as El Mencho, founder and leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the most powerful criminal organization in Mexico and one of the most powerful in the Western Hemisphere, is dead. According to official government reports, he sustained injuries during an operation by Mexican Special Forces and did not survive transport to medical facilities. At 59 years old, the man who built a global criminal enterprise is gone. And the question that has haunted investigators, journalists, analysts, and anyone following this case since that Sunday in February is simple but devastating. Did she know what would happen when she left that mountain compound? Did she deliberately lead Mexican and American authorities to the man they had been hunting for 10 years? Did she betray him for money, for protection, for revenge, for principle? Or was she followed without her knowledge, tracked by surveillance technology she never detected? An unwitting participant in the operation that would end the most intensive manhunt in Mexican history. This is the story of how the woman El Mencho trusted led authorities directly to the hideout, where he would meet his end. This is the story of how a romantic relationship became the vulnerability that years of extraordinary operational security could not protect against. This is the story of intelligence work, surveillance technology, human sources, and the oldest weakness in the history of fugitives: trust. Because no matter how careful you are, no matter how many precautions you take, no matter how sophisticated your security apparatus, no matter how disciplined your operational procedures, if you trust the wrong person, or if the right person makes one mistake, or if someone close to the person you trust betrays that confidence, everything falls apart. And on February 22nd, 2026, in a forest in Tapalpa, Jalisco, Mexico, everything fell apart for the most wanted man in the country. Understanding how this operation succeeded requires understanding who El Mencho was and why he had remained free for so long when every intelligence agency on Earth was looking for him. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes was born July 17, 1966, in a rural community in Michoacán, one of the most impoverished regions of Mexico. He grew up in poverty. He dropped out of primary school. He had no formal education, no inherited wealth, no family connections to power. What he had was ambition, ruthlessness, and strategic brilliance. By 2010, he had built the Jalisco New Generation Cartel into what the DEA described as one of the most powerful and fastest-growing criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. The organization operated across at least 21 of Mexico's 32 states. It maintained active networks in virtually every part of the United States. The DEA estimated that the organization was responsible for at least 1/3 of illicit substances entering the United States. The U.S. State Department designated his organization a foreign terrorist organization in early 2025, one of the first Mexican criminal groups to receive that designation. Washington put a $15 million bounty on his head, one of the highest rewards ever offered for a criminal fugitive, comparable only to rewards offered for figures like Osama bin Laden. And yet he remained free year after year, while his family members were systematically arrested, extradited, imprisoned. His son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, was extradited to the United States in 2020, where he is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. His wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, was arrested on money laundering charges in 2022. She was released briefly in 2025 but remains under legal scrutiny. His brother, Antonio Oseguera Cervantes, was arrested in 2022 and extradited to the United States in 2023. His brother Abraham, known as Don Rodo, and regarded as one of the organization's founding figures and its primary money laundering operator, was recaptured by Mexican authorities in February 2025. The entire family structure around El Mencho was dismantled piece by piece through years of coordinated law enforcement action between the United States and Mexico. The organization's financial infrastructure was targeted through Treasury Department sanctions. The logistics networks were disrupted through arrests of key operators. The enforcement structure was weakened through targeted operations against regional commanders. Everything surrounding El Mencho was under assault, but El Mencho himself remained untouchable, protected by operational security so tight that it impressed even the intelligence professionals hunting him. He survived by operating with extraordinary discipline. He trusted almost no one outside his immediate security detail. He moved constantly between safe houses, never staying in one location long enough for authorities to develop actionable intelligence. He avoided electronic communications that could be intercepted by signals intelligence. He did not use cell phones that could be tracked. He did not use internet connections that could be monitored. He communicated through trusted couriers who carried messages physically rather than electronically. Only a handful of photographs of him existed, most taken decades earlier when he was still rising through criminal ranks. Recent photographs were virtually non-existent, making visual identification nearly impossible, even if someone saw him in person. He was rumored to be dead multiple times over the years. In February 2022, Mexican media reported that he had been eliminated in a cartel confrontation. Investigations proved this false. Other reports claimed that kidney disease, which he was known to suffer from, had taken him in a Guadalajara hospital. Those reports were also false. He was alive, still commanding operations, still directing strategy, still managing one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in modern history, and he was protected not just by armed security but by layers of operational discipline that kept his location unknown even to many members of his own organization. What intelligence agencies could not penetrate through electronic surveillance, through financial tracking, through human intelligence networks built over years, they would ultimately penetrate through something simpler and more ancient. A romantic relationship, a human connection, a vulnerability that operational security could not eliminate, because humans need connection, even when connection creates risk. And in February 2026, that connection became the pathway that led Mexican special forces directly to the compound where El Mencho was hiding. Before we examine exactly how the operation unfolded hour by hour, how intelligence agencies identified the woman who could lead them to El Mencho, what the three competing theories are about whether she betrayed him deliberately or unwittingly or something in between, and what this case reveals about how even the most sophisticated fugitives are ultimately captured through human vulnerabilities. Rather than technological failures, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because this is not just a story about one criminal fugitive and one intelligence operation. This is a case study in how modern law enforcement works, in how surveillance technology intersects with traditional human intelligence gathering, in how operational security can be nearly perfect for over 10 years and then fail completely in 24 hours because of trust and human connection. New investigations every week examining cases that deserve depth, accuracy, and serious analysis rather than sensationalism. If you want to understand not just what happened in Tapalpa on February 22nd, but how it happened, why it happened when it did, and what it teaches us about fugitive operations and intelligence methodology, hit that like button and tell us in the comments. Do you think she betrayed him deliberately, or was she an unwitting participant tracked without her knowledge? The woman whose visit to Tapalpa on February 21st set in motion the operation that ended with El Mencho's death has never been publicly identified. Her name has not been released by Mexican authorities. Her name has not been released by American authorities. Photographs of her have not been published in media reports. Whether she is alive at this moment, where she is living if she is alive, whether she is in witness protection under a new identity, or hiding independently from potential retaliation, whether she has been relocated to another country, or remains in Mexico, none of that information is public. The silence surrounding her identity is nearly absolute. What is known, confirmed through government sources and reported by multiple credible outlets, including major news organizations, is that she was described as a romantic partner of El Mencho. Not a wife, as he was already married, but someone he maintained a relationship with despite the extraordinary risks that any personal connection created for his operational security. That she had access to him despite his security measures tells us something significant. El Mencho did not allow random people into his presence. His security protocols were designed specifically to prevent anyone from knowing his location who did not absolutely need to know. Yet this woman had access. She could visit him. She knew where he would be. That level of access indicates substantial trust, the kind of trust that develops over time, in relationships where both parties are taking risks. She was taking the risk of associating with one of the most wanted men on earth, knowing that anyone connected to him was vulnerable to surveillance, arrest, or consequences from rival organizations. He was taking the risk of allowing someone into his security perimeter who could, whether deliberately or accidentally, compromise his location. What is confirmed through reporting is that she visited him at the compound in Tapalpa on Saturday, February 21st. The visit lasted several hours. Then she left, and within 24 hours of her departure, Mexican Special Forces launched the operation that would end with El Mencho's death. Understanding how authorities identified her as the key to finding El Mencho requires understanding how modern intelligence operations work when traditional methods have failed for years. For over a decade, American and Mexican intelligence agencies had tried every conventional approach to locating him. Electronic surveillance of communications networks associated with the organization he led. This involved monitoring phone networks, internet traffic, encrypted messaging applications, anything that might carry communications to or from leadership. Financial tracking of money movements that might indicate where senior figures were located. This involved Treasury Department sanctions, banking surveillance, cryptocurrency monitoring, tracking of front companies and shell corporations, human intelligence from informants within the organization, or from arrested members who might be convinced to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences or witness protection. Satellite imagery and drone surveillance of areas where he was suspected to be hiding, analyzing patterns of activity, vehicle movements, construction that might indicate safe houses. None of it produced actionable intelligence on his specific location for over 10 years. He was too careful. His communications security was too tight. He did not use devices that could be tracked. His movements were too unpredictable. He did not follow patterns that surveillance could identify. His trusted circle was too small and too loyal. People who knew his location were either family members who would not reveal it, or security personnel whose entire identity was built around protecting him. What finally broke the case was not sophisticated technology operating in isolation. It was not a high-level informant providing comprehensive organizational intelligence. It was identifying someone in his personal life who could lead them to him, and then combining human intelligence about that person with technological surveillance to track the relationship. According to what government sources confirmed to media outlets, intelligence agencies identified what was described as a trusted associate of one of El Mencho's romantic partners, not necessarily the woman herself, someone close to her, someone in her circle, someone who had information about her movements, her communications, her travel patterns, her relationship with El Mencho. This is a critical detail because it means the information, if there was deliberate cooperation, may not have come from the woman directly, but from someone she trusted, a driver who transported her to visits, a friend she confided in about the relationship, a family member who knew about her connection to El Mencho, security personnel who accompanied her, anyone in her circle who had knowledge of when and where she would be visiting him. On February 20th, 2026, Mexican military intelligence working with U.S. Northern Command the American military command responsible for operations in North America, including support for Mexican security forces, received what sources described as a concrete tip, not speculation, not rumor, concrete, actionable intelligence. The associate could lead them to El Mencho's current location. The location was identified specifically as Tapalpa, a picturesque colonial town in the mountains of Jalisco, known for tourism, traditional architecture, and mountain scenery. The specific site within Tapalpa was identified as Cabañas La Loma, a vacation compound that had previously been sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department for supporting the organization El Mencho led. This prior sanctioning is significant because it means authorities already knew the location had connections to the organization. They had identified it, investigated it, designated it officially. What they had not known until February 20th was that El Mencho himself was using it as a hideout. The intelligence included critical timing information. The romantic partner was visiting El Mencho on Saturday, February 21st. Then she would leave. This created a specific operational window. If authorities waited until she departed, they could act without risking her safety in the assault and without alerting El Mencho during her visit that the operation was compromised. If they acted while she was present, they would either have to treat her as a hostage situation, complicating the tactical approach, or risk her being harmed in the confrontation that would almost certainly occur. If they waited too long after she left, El Mencho might move to a different location. The window was narrow. Saturday she arrives. Saturday evening or Sunday morning she leaves. Sunday they act. A 24-hour operational clock started ticking from the moment the intelligence was received. Mid-video educational statement. This analysis examines law enforcement methodology and intelligence operations for educational purposes. All information presented is based on verified government sources, official reports, and credible journalistic investigations. Our goal is to understand how modern fugitive operations work, not to glorify criminal activity or sensationalize tragic events. The intelligence picture that authorities assembled over the next 36 hours reveals how modern operations combine different intelligence sources into actionable operational plans. The romantic partner traveled to Tapalpa on Saturday, February 21st. The specific details of her travel have not been disclosed. Did she drive from Guadalajara? Did she come from another city? Was she alone or accompanied by security? How long did the journey take? Those operational details remain classified, likely because revealing them would reveal surveillance methods. What is confirmed is that she arrived at Cabañas La Loma and met with Oseguera. She stayed for several hours, long enough that intelligence assets monitoring the situation could confirm through multiple methods that El Mencho was present at the location. How did they confirm his presence? The methods are not publicly disclosed, but we can infer from standard intelligence practices what was likely involved. Physical surveillance teams positioned in Tapalpa or in surrounding areas, observing the compound from a distance using optical equipment. Technical surveillance including drone or satellite coverage providing overhead imagery of the compound and surrounding area. Signals intelligence monitoring any electronic emissions from the compound, including radio communications from security personnel. And critically, information from the human source, the trusted associate, who had provided the initial tip and who may have been in communication with the woman or with people around her. All of these intelligence streams would have been fused together at a command center, where analysts confirmed that the target was present at the location. This was not assumption. This was verified intelligence built from multiple sources, all pointing to the same conclusion. She left late Saturday or early Sunday. Again, the specific timing has not been disclosed, but the fact that she left is confirmed. He stayed behind with his security detail, and at that moment, authorities had what they had not had in over 10 years of intensive hunting: confirmed location, verified presence of the specific target, and a target who was stationary in a known location rather than moving between hideouts. Planning for the assault began within the hour of confirmation that El Mencho remained at the compound after the woman departed. This was not an operation that could be executed by local police or even by standard military units. El Mencho's security detail would be heavily armed with military-grade weapons. The compound would likely have defensive positions prepared. Approaching without being detected would require special operations capabilities. The Mexican National Guard's Special Reaction Force, an elite unit trained specifically for high-risk operations against organized criminal groups, was tasked with the mission. U.S. Northern Command provided what was described as surveillance support, which likely included real-time drone or satellite coverage of the compound and surrounding area, allowing Mexican commanders to see movements, identify defensive positions, and adjust the tactical plan as needed. The operational plan had to balance multiple competing requirements. Speed was essential. If El Mencho learned that authorities were closing in, he would flee immediately. He had survived this long precisely because he could move quickly when threatened, but the approach also required secrecy. If forces staged too close to Tapalpa too soon, his security network might detect their presence through lookouts, informants in local communities, or simply by observing unusual military activity. The solution was to stage forces outside Jalisco entirely to maintain the element of surprise, then move them in rapidly to establish a perimeter before launching the assault. This required precise timing and coordination. Forces had to arrive simultaneously from multiple directions to cut off escape routes before El Mencho realized he was surrounded. On the morning of Sunday, February 22nd, the operation began. Mexican special forces moved into position around Cabañas La Loma. Troops who had staged outside the area overnight moved in quickly to establish a perimeter, cutting off roads and forest paths that could be used for escape. Then assault teams moved toward the compound itself. What happened next has been described in official government statements and in media reports based on those statements, but the specific tactical details remain classified for operational security reasons. What is known from official sources is that when Mexican forces approached the compound and made their presence known, El Mencho's security team responded with force immediately. According to official reports, multiple individuals were killed during the initial confrontation. 2 Mexican soldiers sustained injuries during the assault. The confrontation created chaos that El Mencho and 2 of his personal bodyguards exploited to flee the main compound. They escaped into the dense forest surrounding Cabañas La Loma, forest that El Mencho likely knew well from time spent at the compound, forest that provided concealment, but that also trapped them, because special forces had already established the perimeter. Mexican Special Forces units split into pursuit teams to track them through the woods. The forest terrain was difficult. Dense undergrowth, steep slopes, limited visibility, but the pursuers had advantages including numbers, training, coordination, and the knowledge that the targets were contained within the perimeter. They found El Mencho hiding in undergrowth. According to official government reports, he had sustained injuries during the operation. The official Mexican government statement released later that day was carefully worded. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes and his 2 bodyguards did not survive transport to medical facilities for treatment. They were placed aboard a helicopter heading toward Mexico City, where advanced medical facilities were available. None of the 3 survived the journey. The bodies were later transported via military aircraft to Mexico City for formal identification through fingerprints and other biometric methods, and for processing according to legal procedures. At 59 years old, the man who had built one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the history of the Western Hemisphere, who had evaded capture for over 10 years, despite being the target of the most intensive manhunt in Mexican law enforcement history, was gone. The $15 million bounty offered by the United States would be claimed. The manhunt was over. And it ended because on Saturday, February 21st, a woman visited him at a mountain compound, and authorities either convinced someone close to her to provide intelligence about that visit, or tracked her movements through surveillance technology, or convinced her directly to cooperate in providing information. Which of those scenarios is true remains the central unanswered question. The question that remains unanswered, actively debated by intelligence analysts and investigative journalists and academics studying organized crime, is whether the woman whose visit led to the operation's success knew what she was doing. Did she understand that her visit would lead to the operation within 24 hours? Or was she an unwitting participant, tracked by surveillance she never detected, providing the intelligence that enabled the operation without her knowledge or consent? There are three competing theories, each supported by different interpretations of the available evidence, each consistent with how operations like this typically work. Understanding these theories requires understanding the motivations people have for cooperating with authorities targeting someone they are personally connected to, and understanding the capabilities of modern surveillance technology. The first theory, the one that assumes deliberate cooperation, holds that the woman was working with Mexican or American authorities in a planned intelligence operation, that she had been identified as someone with access to El Mencho and had been approached, either directly by intelligence officers or through intermediaries who could make contact without revealing official involvement, and had agreed to cooperate in providing intelligence about his location. In this scenario, her visit to Tapalpa on February 21st was not a normal romantic visit motivated by personal relationship. It was an intelligence operation. She was operating as a human source, what intelligence agencies call a human asset. Her purpose in making the visit was to confirm El Mencho's presence at Cabañas La Loma, to observe his security arrangements and report the number of guards and their capabilities, to determine whether he planned to stay at the location or was preparing to move soon, and then to leave so that authorities could launch the operation without her being present during the assault. Why would someone in a romantic relationship with a fugitive, someone who presumably had some personal connection to him, agree to cooperate with authorities hunting him? The motivations in cases like this are typically multiple and overlapping rather than singular. Financial incentive is the most obvious and probably the most powerful. A $15 million reward offered by the United States government is genuinely life-changing money. Even a fraction of that reward, perhaps $5 million or even $1 million paid quietly through channels designed to protect the source's identity and prevent the money from being traced back to cooperation with authorities, would be enough to convince many people to provide information that leads to the capture of someone they know. The money would allow complete reinvention of life, relocation to another country, financial security permanently. Fear is another powerful motivator that cannot be dismissed. If authorities had leverage over her, if she faced potential criminal charges related to the organization El Mencho led, or to financial activities connected to him, or to knowledge of criminal acts, cooperating might have been offered as a way to avoid prosecution entirely, or to receive immunity, or dramatically reduce charges. The leverage does not even need to be current charges. Simply the threat of future investigation and prosecution, communicated clearly by agents who make it understood that cooperation is the only path to avoiding legal consequences, can be enough to change someone from resistance to cooperation. Protection could also be a significant factor in the decision to cooperate. If she wanted to exit the relationship with El Mencho, if she feared for her own safety, either from the organization or from El Mencho himself, if she had witnessed things that made her want to escape but saw no way to leave safely, cooperating with authorities and entering witness protection might have been presented as the only way to escape alive. Witness protection programs can provide new identity, new location, financial support, complete break from previous life. For someone trapped in a relationship with a fugitive, that escape might be worth any price. And finally, there is the possibility, however unlikely it may seem to cynical observers, of genuine moral or ideological motivation. If she had witnessed acts that horrified her, if she had knowledge of serious crimes that troubled her conscience, if she had tried to distance herself from the criminal aspects of El Mencho's life, but found it impossible to separate the person from the activities, she might have decided that cooperation with authorities was morally justified, despite the personal nature of the relationship. This motivation is less common than financial incentive or fear, but it exists in the history of informants and cooperating witnesses. The evidence that supports the deliberate cooperation theory is circumstantial but compelling when examined as a pattern. The timing of her visit, coming just days before the operation was launched, suggests either remarkable coincidence or careful coordination between her movements and operational planning. Intelligence sources confirmed that a trusted associate of one of El Mencho's romantic partners provided the tip that led to the operation. While this phrasing does not prove the woman herself was the direct source, it indicates someone very close to her, someone in her immediate circle, was providing information to authorities. And if someone that close to her was cooperating, it creates questions about whether she had knowledge of it, particularly if that person needed her cooperation to provide intelligence about when and where she would be visiting El Mencho. The fact that she left the compound hours before the operation was launched suggests either very fortunate timing or advanced knowledge that authorities were planning to act and that she needed to depart before the operation began. If she was simply visiting normally without knowledge of any pending operation, the timing of her departure aligning so precisely with the operation is an extraordinary coincidence. And the operational success itself, the fact that forces knew exactly where to go, exactly when to go there, exactly what security arrangements they would face, indicates high-quality, real-time intelligence of the type that typically comes from someone with direct personal access, rather than from remote surveillance. These factors together create a picture consistent with active cooperation. A woman visits a fugitive. She observes his location and security. She reports this information to authorities or to someone working with authorities. She leaves. Authorities launch an operation within hours based on that intelligence. The operation succeeds. The pattern fits deliberate cooperation. But patterns are not proof, and there is another explanation equally consistent with the available evidence. The second theory, which assumes unwitting participation and absence of deliberate cooperation, holds that the woman visited El Mencho on February 21st without any knowledge that she would lead authorities to him. In this scenario, she was not cooperating with intelligence agencies. She had not been approached by agents. She had not agreed to provide information. She was not aware that someone in her immediate circle had become an informant providing intelligence to Mexican or American authorities. She traveled to Tapalpa for what she believed was a normal visit, with someone she was romantically involved with. She spent time with him. She left when the visit concluded for whatever personal reasons governed the length of her stay, and she had no idea that within 24 hours the operation would occur. This theory requires that the trusted associate mentioned in intelligence reports, the person described as close to one of El Mencho's romantic partners, was providing information without the woman's knowledge or consent. This is entirely plausible and consistent with how human intelligence operations often work. Perhaps the associate was a driver who transported her to Tapalpa and who had been recruited by intelligence agencies to report on her movements. Perhaps it was security personnel assigned to be with her during visits who was secretly cooperating with authorities. Perhaps it was a friend she had confided in about the relationship, someone she trusted enough to discuss when and where she would be seeing El Mencho. Perhaps it was a family member who knew about her connection to him and who decided independently to provide that information to authorities, whether for money or fear or moral conviction. Modern surveillance technology makes the unwitting participant theory not just plausible, but probable. If intelligence agencies had identified the woman as someone with potential access to El Mencho, someone who might lead them to him if properly monitored, they could have placed her under comprehensive technical surveillance without her knowledge or consent, and without any cooperation from her. Her mobile phone, if she used one, could have been compromised through malware allowing authorities to track her location in real time, to intercept her communications, to access her contacts and messages. Her vehicle could have been equipped with tracking devices placed during moments when she was not present. She could have been followed by physical surveillance teams trained specifically to remain undetected, teams that maintain distance and use multiple vehicles and change operators to avoid recognition. When she traveled to Tapalpa on February 21st, if she was under this kind of comprehensive surveillance, authorities would have known immediately that she was moving toward the mountains. When she arrived at Cabañas La Loma, they would have been able to confirm the specific location. When she stayed for hours, they would have understood this was not a brief stop but an extended visit, suggesting El Mencho was present and comfortable enough with security to allow her to remain. When she finally left, they would have known immediately that the target was now alone with only his security detail, vulnerable to assault. In this scenario, her visit was the trigger for the operation not because she intended to provide information or because she cooperated deliberately, but because authorities had been waiting months or even years for exactly this kind of opportunity, an opportunity to track her to his location and she provided it unknowingly simply by maintaining a relationship that authorities had identified and were monitoring. The evidence supporting the unwitting participant theory is also circumstantial, but significant. The fact that her identity has never been publicly revealed by Mexican or American authorities could indicate that she was not a willing cooperating witness. If she had agreed to cooperate deliberately and had been placed in witness protection as reward, or protection for that cooperation, there would arguably be less need for the extreme secrecy around her identity, because she would already be secured under a new identity and a new location. The very fact that both governments maintain absolute silence about who she is might suggest they are protecting her, not because she cooperated, but because she did not cooperate, and they do not want to expose an unwitting participant to potential consequences. The fact that no statements from her or about her have been released, no interviews conducted, no public acknowledgement of her role, could indicate either that she is refusing to speak publicly because she does not want to acknowledge her unwitting role, or that she genuinely does not know the extent to which her movements were monitored and used. And significantly, the fact that the operation was described in intelligence briefings as resulting from information from a trusted associate of a romantic partner, rather than from the romantic partner directly, could be precisely accurate if the source was someone in her circle rather than the woman herself. Intelligence agencies are typically very careful with language in describing sources. If they say the information came from an associate rather than from the woman, that phrasing is likely intentional and accurate. The third theory, more complex and perhaps closer to the messy reality of how intelligence operations actually work, attempts to find middle ground between deliberate cooperation and complete ignorance. This theory holds that the woman may have been aware she was a person of interest to authorities, may have suspected or known she was under some form of surveillance, may even have been approached and questioned at some point, but did not actively cooperate in providing specific actionable intelligence, and did not know the timing or nature of the operation that would result from her visit to Tapalpa. In this scenario, perhaps she had been contacted months earlier by agents who identified themselves and asked questions about her relationship with El Mencho. Perhaps they offered money or immunity or protection if she would cooperate. Perhaps she refused, but the contact itself would have made her aware that authorities knew about her and were monitoring her. She might have suspected after that contact that her communications were being monitored or that her movements were being tracked. She might have taken precautions as a result, but she did not provide specific intelligence about the February 21st visit. She did not tell authorities she would be going to Tapalpa. She did not report El Mencho's location. Instead, authorities tracked her there through surveillance methods she suspected existed, but could not evade. This middle ground theory allows for a more nuanced reality, where she was neither a fully willing cooperating witness receiving payment and protection, nor a completely ignorant victim of surveillance she never detected. Instead, she was someone caught in the middle, aware that she was under scrutiny, possibly even aware that her relationship with El Mencho made her valuable to authorities, but not actively cooperating and not controlling how that scrutiny was being used. This scenario is psychologically complex, but may be closer to truth than the cleaner narratives of either deliberate cooperation or complete innocence. What we know with certainty, confirmed through government statements and credible reporting, is limited but significant. A woman described as a romantic partner of El Mencho visited him at Cabañas La Loma on Saturday, February 21st. Intelligence about that visit, whether from her directly or from someone close to her, or through technical surveillance tracking her movements, reached Mexican military intelligence and U.S. Northern Command. Authorities confirmed El Mencho's presence at the location through that intelligence. An operation was planned and executed within 24 hours. The operation concluded as documented in official government reports, and the woman, whoever she is, wherever she is, disappeared completely from public view. Whether she is in witness protection living under a new identity in the United States or another country, whether she is hiding independently in Mexico, whether she is even still alive, none of that information has been made public. The Mexican government has made no statements about her. The American government has made no statements about her. And the organization El Mencho led if its remaining leadership knows her identity, has not made that information public either. The operational response from the organization El Mencho, led in the hours following the operation, suggests how seriously his surviving associates took what had occurred. Within hours of Mexican authorities announcing that El Mencho had died in the Tapalpa operation, coordinated activities erupted simultaneously across multiple Mexican states. This was not spontaneous reaction. This was organized, planned, coordinated response demonstrating that command and control structures within the organization survived and were capable of executing complex operations. Over 250 roadblocks appeared across 20 states. Vehicles were stopped and blocked major roads. Armed confrontations with military and police forces occurred in multiple cities simultaneously. Mexican authorities reported significant casualties among National Guard personnel in coordinated incidents across Jalisco. Schools were ordered closed by authorities. Airlines canceled flights into and out of Guadalajara and other affected cities. The U.S. Embassy in Mexico City issued emergency warnings telling American citizens in affected states to shelter in place, to avoid travel, to stay away from areas where activities were occurring. Major cities including Guadalajara, a metropolitan area of over 5 million people, and a host city for the upcoming 2026 FIFA World Cup, became quiet as residents stayed indoors. Videos posted to social media showed travelers moving quickly through airports trying to leave before flights were canceled. This was not random chaos. This was strategic message sent simultaneously to multiple audiences. To Mexican and American authorities, the message was that there would be consequences for the operation. To the Mexican public, the message was that the organization remained capable despite the loss of its founder. To anyone within the organization who might have been involved in providing intelligence that led to the operation, whether deliberately or accidentally, the message was unmistakable about the seriousness with which such matters are viewed. If the woman whose visit led authorities to Tapalpa was involved deliberately, she would have understood from the scale and intensity of the response exactly the situation she faced. If she was in witness protection, she would need to remain there permanently, living under a false identity forever. If she was not in protection, she would be looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. The success of the operation, regardless of whether the woman cooperated deliberately or was tracked unwittingly, reveals lessons about fugitive operations and intelligence work that apply far beyond this specific case. First, no amount of operational security, no matter how sophisticated or carefully maintained, can fully protect against human vulnerabilities and human relationships. El Mencho survived for over a decade by trusting almost no one, by moving constantly between hideouts, by avoiding any communications that could be intercepted, by maintaining extraordinary operational discipline that impressed even the professionals hunting him. His security procedures were nearly perfect, but he maintained at least one romantic relationship outside his marriage. The relationship required trust. It required allowing someone access to him, access to his location, access to his security arrangements. It required being in a known place at a predictable time when that person visited. And that single vulnerability, that one concession to human need for connection, became the opening that authorities had been searching for. This pattern repeats throughout the history of fugitive operations. Pablo Escobar, the Colombian figure who dominated certain activities in the 1980s and early 1990s, was located in Medellin in 1993 through surveillance of his family's communications. He maintained contact with his family, despite knowing it created vulnerability. That contact led Colombian and American forces to the safe house where the operation concluded. Osama bin Laden, who orchestrated the September 11th attacks and evaded capture for nearly 10 years, was found in Abbottabad, Pakistan in 2011 through tracking a trusted courier who had access to the compound where bin Laden was hiding. The courier was the vulnerability. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, leader of the Sinaloa Cartel and one of El Mencho's rivals, was captured in 2014 after meeting with actors and producers to discuss a potential biographical movie. His desire for recognition, his need to tell his story, created the vulnerability that led to his recapture. The pattern is consistent across decades and across different fugitives. The vulnerability is rarely technological failure or operational mistakes in security procedures. The vulnerability is human connection and the people fugitives trust to provide that connection. El Mencho needed human relationship. He trusted someone enough to allow them access despite the risks. And whether that trust was exploited through deliberate cooperation for money or protection, or exploited unknowingly through surveillance tracking the relationship, the result was identical. On February 22nd in a Tapalpa forest, that human vulnerability ended a 10-year manhunt. Second, modern intelligence operations succeed through integration of human intelligence with technological surveillance rather than through either approach in isolation. The initial tip that led to the operation appears to have come from a human source, the trusted associate of El Mencho's romantic partner, who provided information to authorities. But confirming that intelligence, tracking the woman's movements to Tapalpa, monitoring Cabañas La Loma to verify El Mencho's presence, coordinating the assault force, all of that required technological capabilities including signals intelligence monitoring electronic emissions, geolocation tracking to follow the woman's travel, aerial surveillance from drones or satellites providing real-time, overhead imagery. Neither human intelligence alone nor technology alone would have been sufficient to make the operation possible. A human source without technological confirmation might provide unreliable intelligence. Technological surveillance without human sources to interpret what the technology reveals might miss critical details. The combination, human sources providing specific information enhanced and confirmed by technological systems, creates the kind of high-confidence actionable intelligence that justifies launching operations against defended targets. Third, the operation demonstrates the critical value of patience in intelligence work. Authorities could have acted earlier with less certain intelligence. They could have conducted operations at other locations over the years based on tips that proved less reliable. They could have launched operations when they suspected El Mencho might be in a general area, but could not confirm his exact location. Instead, they waited. They waited until they had confirmed presence at a specific location from multiple intelligence sources. They waited until the woman who might complicate the operation had left the compound. They waited until assault forces were positioned and a tactical plan was developed and rehearsed. That patience, that willingness to wait for the perfect operational moment rather than acting on incomplete information and risking failure, is what allowed this operation to succeed where years of previous efforts had failed. The woman whose visit to Tapalpa led to the operation has vanished as completely as El Mencho himself once vanished from public view. Whether she lives under a new identity in the United States Witness Protection Program, whether she fled to another country independently, whether she remains in Mexico hiding, whether she is even still alive, the public does not know and likely will never know. The governments involved maintain absolute silence. The media has not identified her despite intensive efforts to discover her identity, and the organization El Mencho led, if its remaining leadership knows who she is, has not made that information public. She exists now only as a figure in the historical narrative of how the most wanted man in Mexico was finally located. The woman he trusted enough to allow into his mountain hideout. The woman whose visit on a Saturday in February ended a manhunt that had consumed resources from multiple governments for over a decade. The woman who either cooperated deliberately for $15 million, or protection or principle, or who led authorities to him unknowingly through surveillance technology she never detected, or who was caught in some complex middle ground between cooperation and ignorance that she herself may not fully understand. The story of what occurred is ultimately a human story about trust and vulnerability. He built one of the most powerful criminal organizations in modern history through strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency. He evaded capture for over 10 years through operational discipline that impressed intelligence professionals. He survived the systematic arrest and extradition of virtually every member of his family who had been part of the organization, but he could not exist in complete isolation. He needed human connection. He trusted someone. And whether that trust was exploited deliberately or unknowingly or something in between, the result on February 22, 2026 was documented in official reports. She is gone now, disappeared into shadows or witness protection, or perhaps no longer alive. He is gone. The operation concluded as documented. The organization he built is fragmenting, with 4 regional commanders competing for control, and no clear successor emerging from a family structure that law enforcement systematically dismantled. And the governments that hunted him for 10 years are declaring success while nervously watching to see whether what emerges from the succession struggle will be more stable and less problematic than what existed before, or whether the fragmentation will produce even greater challenges. This investigation was conducted for educational purposes to examine how modern intelligence operations work and how fugitives are ultimately located through human vulnerabilities rather than technological failures. Our analysis is based on verified government sources, credible journalistic reporting, and established intelligence methodologies. Subscribe to this channel if you want to understand not just what happens in operations like this, but how they work, why they succeed or fail, and what they reveal about the intersection of human behavior and technological surveillance. Hit that notification bell for investigations that provide depth and context rather than just headlines. And tell us what you think in the comments. Did she cooperate deliberately? Was she tracked unknowingly through surveillance she never detected? Or was she caught in some complex middle ground? The truth may never be made public, but the questions deserve to be examined seriously. Thank you for approaching this analysis with the depth and seriousness it deserves.